Okay, I want to introduce the concept of subfunctions in this video here. So let's go ahead and do a new script file to do a function, and we're going to do the same thing we've done before. And in this case, I'm going to have a function that has multiple outputs. I'm going to say add result, comma, subtract result. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm going to create a function that does addition and subtraction. Okay, so these are our two outputs here, and I'm going to call this subfunction underscore demo, and I'm going to have two inputs for this. It's going to be x comma y. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. Sure. Okay, so we've saved it. We have the file name down here, and then I can make a comment. This function adds and subtracts. Okay, you can put more detail later on if you wanted to do that. And then essentially what I'm going to do is normally what I would do here, I would say, okay, my add, because I have add result as my output, I'm going to do add result. And normally what I would do is I'd say equals x plus y, and then my subtract result, and I got to make sure that I type all the variables properly. I don't make any typos. X minus y. Okay, and then I would be done. So I would save this, and this would be fine. And if you see it's green, looks good. So I got add result goes here, subtract result goes here, my x are defined and my y's are defined, and I would test it out in my script. Okay, so this is a 100% correct function file to do addition and subtraction. However, because I want to introduce the concept of subfunctions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, rather than do this computation here, I'm going to call another function. So let me just copy this here just to make my life easier so I don't have to type again. I'm just going to copy it down there for now. Ignore this on the bottom here. But what I'm going to do, instead of saying x plus y, I'm going to call another function called add with the inputs x comma y. And then instead of doing the computation here, I'm going to call another function called subtract with the inputs x comma y, and I'm going to put semicolons here for both of them. Okay, so now rather than do the computation here, I'm going to call another function add, another function subtract, and both of these are going to be subfunctions because I'm going to define them later in the code here. So I'm going to say function result equals add, and then I'm going to put some xy as my variable, and then instead of add result, I'm just going to say result equals that. Okay, end. And I can technically put end here if I wanted to, but I'm just going to ignore it for now. And I'm going to do function result equals subtract the same inputs x, y. And no, actually, I don't need to make them the same inputs. As long as I'm consistent with my naming conventions, I can change them to whatever I want. But for the sake of clarity, let's just keep it this way. Okay, so now what I just did, I'm going to go ahead and save this. I've changed my function to have subfunctions in here, meaning this is my main function, and if I click on add, it's going to call another function here called add, which takes the same inputs x and y, and then it's going to do the computation down here. X plus y gives me an output result. This output result is going to go over here, which is going to come into my add result, which is going to come out to this guy. Okay, same thing with subtract. I'm going to go to subtract. It's going to call this subfunction with the inputs x and y, which are going to come down here, and they're going to go into result, which comes back up here, which is eventually going to go back to subtract result, which goes back to my main output result. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. I have x and y. It's going to come into here, in here, x and x. These guys are going to go into this guy here, which goes into here, and this guy here, which goes into here. Okay, so with that said, I want you to play around with changing the variable names, because this x doesn't have to be the same as this x. Um, I mean, we can name it a different name if we wanted to. Okay, but it's good to just keep it the same naming convention. So this is a quick introduction to subfunctions. Now, one thing I want you to consider is, so I showed you how to do it without the subfunctions, where we just put the x and y up here. That's one way. The second way is using a subfunction. The third way is to actually define this guy as a separate function in a separate file, and then this function as a file in a different another function file. Okay, and then that way, so if I remove both of these, make them two separate files, add and subtract, I can still call this guy the way it is, and that would work. So we have three different ways of coming up with the same result. And of course, we can test it out. So let me just show you how to test it out here. If I say x equals 1:5, and then y equals, let's just say 2:6. Oops. All right. And then I can just say plus minus are my outputs equals subfunction underscore demo x comma y, enter, and these are the answers I get. Okay, and you can double check them, make sure they make sense. Again, testing it, the way this is set up now, this is the way you would test it. If you're going to change it to the very first version I showed you, where we didn't have subfunctions, you would test it that way as well, make sure that you get the same answer. And if you wanted to make these three different functions, one function for this guy, one file, another file here, and another file for this guy, test that out. So I recommend you play around with those three different versions of functions as well as subfunctions. Okay.